everyone. Welcome to our second webinar in our symposium, Wrapping Up, Taking Stock, and Moving Forward, the New Reality for K-12 Education. Today, we will be discussing your summer to-do list, coronavirus edition. Welcome I'm sorry. To our second webinar in our I'm Gharapour Wernz, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. And I'm joined today by our regular panelists, Shelli Anderson.
Hi, everyone.
Nicki Bazer.
Hi, everyone.
Fattore Crumley.
Hi.
And I'd also like to welcome our special guest, Amy Dickerson. Welcome, Amy.
Thank you. Hi, everybody.
Our plan today is to first provide some insights on a number of priorities that you should be focusing on during the summer that are different from what you might normally be doing in past years, obviously because of COVID-19. We also will take your questions, so we'd love for you to ask any questions that you might have through the Q&A function on Zoom, and we will do our best to answer them during the webinar. As always, if you find yourself looking for more information or if we're not able to get to your question, please reach out to one of us. And please also make sure that you sign up for the remaining sessions in our webinar symposium. These will occur each Thursday at noon through June 11th. Our next webinar is May 21st, 2020 at 12 p.m. and is entitled Extreme School Makeover, Space Planning, Deep Cleaning, and Safety, Oh My. You can find out more information about the symposium and all of our other alerts and blogs and webinars on our website at franzic.com. All right, let's go ahead and jump in. So on May 7th, 2020, Governor Pritzker issued his plan for reopening the state of Illinois, which is called Restore Illinois. Nicki, what are the basics of the plan and what does it mean for schools, particularly as they are preparing their to-do list for the summer?
Yeah, thanks, Jackie, and good afternoon, everyone. I think everybody is sort of familiar with Governor Pritzker's new plan, Restore Illinois. It calls for reopening the state in 5 phases after we meet as a state key benchmarks related to the number of infections and also, the number of folks who are using hospital services and the like. The plan splits Illinois into 4 regions: Northeast, North Central, Central, and South, allowing each to move separately through the different phases. So we might see some reopenings in some parts of the state before others. So we should keep that in mind. We don't see any reopening of physically for schools until phase 4. And the way schools can reopen during phase 4 is, I think, a bit of an open question at this point. We are waiting for guidance on that from the Illinois Department of Public Health. Amy, have you seen anything yet? At last I checked, there's nothing as of to date.
Yeah, that's what I'm seeing as well. I've been on the department's website and it looks like we are still waiting for them to issue the guidance with regard to, how schools may be able to reopen safely in phase 4 and what that will look like. They do acknowledge that summer school sessions will operate remotely this summer, which we know. And interestingly, their website does state that they are currently working with stakeholders and public health officials to develop guidance for how childcare will need to operate in phases 3 and 4 to ensure safety for staff, children, and their families. So, I'd imagine that those discussions may then inform what the guidance for reopening schools in phase 4 will look like. But again, it remains to be seen. So we're keeping an eye out for that.
Yeah, I know that a lot of districts, and we're going to talk more about this today and in other sessions of our symposium, they're really trying to figure out right now what the fall looks like. So they're coming up with multiple different plans. I think in large part because we really don't know. We don't have that guidance from IDPH. We don't know what a partial reopening or a phase reopening or what a phase 4 reopening even looks like. Hoping and expecting that we might reach phase 4, by early fall. Obviously, we're really all waiting for phase 5, which is a full reopening. But hopefully IDPH will come out with that guidance relatively soon so that part of our summer planning, which is obviously what we're focused on right now, is figuring out how to reopen safely if phase 4 does arise.
So it sounds like many schools are going to be dealing with a stay-at-home order in their region for some or all of the summer. Do schools have to allow their 12-month staff to work from home during this time period? Shelli, what are the considerations?
Well, I mean, I think that there are a number of considerations related to this issue, and we really have to look at it from a practical standpoint. So just, if there is a stay-at-home order that's lifted or not, whether or not you have a need for employees to come back into the workplace, and can you do so with a, really making sure that people are social distance, that they're safe. And if you can't do that, determining whether you really need them to be there or not. I think that's going to have to be done by district to determine whether or not you're going to have people come in or not.
Yeah, and I do think that it really is an individual consideration where you have to think about what people are doing. I understand that, we have some essential workers in the schools, but you have to really look at the tasks. If they can be done at home, if they can't be done at home, how many people are working on the particular task? So we were talking this morning about, moving big pieces of furniture. Can we really do that safely in an environment where we have to have social distancing? So you do want to take these situations and consider them carefully before you look at a mass reopening, just because, obviously from a personal standpoint, we don't want our employees to get sick, but also, from a liability perspective.
I think the other part of this also is that we might see employees who actually are coming to their supervisors and saying, can I continue to work from home? And perhaps not just because there's a stay-at-home order, but now that they've determined I can do my job from home, or I can do 95% of my job from home, can that now be the new normal? So all of our administrators making sure that they are talking to their supervisors about what the message should be back to employees about what our expectations are post-COVID, and that just because you can do your job home, from home now, does not necessarily mean that that's going to be available to you once we are hopefully, back to school.
Right. We can't forget about the public facing aspect of being a public school district.
Right. So we've talked a lot at Frantic over the past couple of months about the Families First Coronavirus Response Act. And so just as a reminder, that's the federal law that requires certain employers, including most of our schools, to provide employees with paid sick leave or family medical leave for a number of specified COVID-19 reasons. Coupled with that, I know a lot of parents are finding out right now. I know Nicki and I were just talking about how we both received notice that summer camp is not happening for our children this summer. So thinking about those two things together, do the emergency FMLA sick leave requirements apply where summer camps have been closed? Nicki, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely, Jackie. Yeah, we had a long conversation. My kids go to sleepaway camp, and there was a lot of deep mourning on both the part of the children in my house and also the parents in the house about the fact that our children would not be gone this summer. So we know you guys are all going through that, and it is actually super, super hard. So just to be clear, paid sick leave and the emergency FMLA leave are not available for the qualifying reason that someone is, someone's school or childcare provider is closed for the summer vacation. So just because your school is closed for the summer, doesn't make you eligible if it's closed for non-COVID related reasons, meaning, typically our schools close in the summer. However, to the question that you asked, Jackie, the employee may be able to take leave, yes, if the child care's providers, either a summer camp or an actual daycare is closed or unavailable for COVID-related reasons. So if typically your employee enrolls their child in summer camp 9 to 5, and that summer camp is closed, then yes, they would be eligible for the FMLA and emergency sick leave under the Act.
And this is something I think that we're going to have to think about as it relates to the prior question you asked, Jackie, in terms of, are we going to have employees coming back to work, now if the stay-at-home order is lifted, let's say June 1st here, and all those employees who may have had plans for their kids who don't have a place for them to go now, might be better for them to work from home than be taking FMLA leave. So something for everyone to think about.
Now, thinking more about summer and employment, Shelli, what about RIFs? What should schools be thinking about for their summer checklist regarding reductions in force?
Well, I think the first thing that everyone should do is check your collective bargaining agreement, because the more people I talk to, and whether it's districts that we work with or districts that we don't work with, finding out that many of them have provisions in their contracts that indicate that there is a longer period that you have to give notice, or that there's an actual due date, which may have already passed, by which you have to give notice. So to the extent that you determine that you have not passed that deadline, I think really looking at what your needs are, you're trying to determine what your needs are going to be for next year. And before taking any sort of action to RIF, maybe looking at other creative ways that you might be able to employ, some of those individuals. I know Dana and I were talking about this. You don't want to lose people, so we have to think of something.
You don't want to lose people, but at the same time, I think there's lots of districts that have a lot of support staff that work directly with kids. And I think you really, if we're going to be starting remote in the fall, you need to think about ways that you're using them and how they're checking in. If you're a 1-to-1 aide assigned to one kid, you're not working 6.5 hours a day. I mean, even if you're being utilized, you're maybe being utilized during the time that the teacher's checking in with the student, or for individual check-ins, and reorganizing the way you have those aides assigned is probably a good idea. Plus, you need to consider some of your support staff may not be as savvy in connecting with people through technology. And again, I think this is a time when we're talking about summer is, if we have to go on with this remote learning, how do we refine it? How do we make it better? How do we, keep up and really provide something that is going to be quality? And I think considering how you're using your support staff is a big part of that.
And just a reminder that if the collective bargaining agreement does not state otherwise, there's a 30-day notice period. So just to make sure that everyone does remember that it's different than for our licensed staff.
Right, and that could be used to reduce hours as well as reduce people. So you might just be looking at reducing hours or changing around people's schedules, and you can do that through the RIF process.
So for part of the summer, I would say making sure you're sitting down with your union and looking at the categories that you have. And if you need to do a RIF, work through that as to where people fall before you actually take it to the board for action, because you don't want to have to deal with it later. So I think that's certainly something that our HR folks should be doing this summer.
Yeah, because we talked about last time, Shelli, a little bit about the fact that a lot of collective bargaining agreements also have pretty complicated bumping and seniority provisions. And so you've got to be crystal clear before you sit down with the union what that looks like, because you may have a lot of folks within that support staff union sort of bumping all around, and that's going to cause some disruption. So obviously making sure that you're planning for that smoothly and then sitting down with the union.
Absolutely.
So then on the opposite side of the coin, I guess we're talking about, thinking a lot about laying off staff, but we also do know that some of our school district clients and school clients are hiring staff, and they are probably not going to be able to do face-to-face interviews. So Shelli, what are some of the things that they should be thinking about? Can they do interviews of new staff remotely?
Absolutely. In terms of can they do it, I think that we have to be mindful of, obviously, if there's a reason that you wanted to have someone come in face-to-face. I know we've gotten some questions about, can we offer that to one group of employees? And Amy and I were just talking about this the other day in terms of, do you put someone at a disadvantage if you even offer them to come in and one person does come in and the other person, decides that they're not comfortable doing that? Amy, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
Yeah, I just think it's something to really, consider carefully. First, if you do feel like it's important and really critical to your decision-making process that you have in-person interviews, first just, consider that in and of itself rather than doing it just to do it, for example, in like the final round of interviews. And, when you get to that stage, if you do really feel like it would add significant value to have in-person interviews, really consider making it very clear that may be an optional and voluntary process for candidates, especially being mindful that candidates may not be comfortable coming in person or may have limitations or health limitations in doing so. And, and with that, then consider if there is one candidate who does express concern or inability to come in person, consider then perhaps just continuing to hold all of the interviews virtually so as to not put someone at a disadvantage just because they may not be able to come in.
And now what if an applicant can't get their fingerprint, criminal background check fingerprints completed? What are our thoughts on that?
I've seen some districts, really working to try to obviously have that done as quickly as possible in light of our stay-at-home orders and what's available in terms of getting those fingerprint checks. But when they want to move forward with making an offer for an employee, for a candidate, to just make that offer contingent and make it very clear in their verbal and written communications that the offer that they're extending is contingent on the candidate's successful completion of that fingerprint check.
And absolutely, you should not be having people be before students that haven't had a background check. I know that sometimes there's delays, and I think also, make sure you're going on the Illinois State Police website, because there are multiple agencies and businesses that do these. And I know that we're experiencing closures, but you may be able to go through a different avenue than you usually go through and find someone to help you out in this regard. But you definitely don't want, even in this means remotely, you don't want people with no background check being in front of kids.
That's a great point.
Yeah, and I would just caution for those districts out there who may have a practice of not hiring an individual who has a particular type of arrest on their background check, and not saying that I know of any that do that, but to the extent that you do, a reminder that you cannot base an employment decision off an arrest. So if you were to go about doing this and making it contingent, if you then got the background check back and it had that red flag particular for your district, be very cautious about whether or not you're making that decision based on the arrest or not, which could lead to a charge for the Department of Human Rights.
Right. I mean, in best case scenario, you give yourself time to get it back, to figure out what you're going to do, and to make adjustments as needed.
Dana and Shelli, I know that, we often, some of those, results aren't always the easiest to read and navigate. And so I know we often, will work with districts to help them review those to be able to make a best assessment for whether or not someone is eligible to be employed or not based on those results.
Yep.
So then, thinking about students, we've heard a lot about the numbers of students who are just not engaging with remote learning. And obviously for most schools, remote learning is coming to an end unless a student is in summer school. But is there any responsibility on the school's behalf to reach out and check in with these students? Are there any legal implications that schools should be aware about in doing so?
So I don't think there's any additional legal requirements, and there haven't been any put out at this point, but I think it's just a matter of best practice and sort of what we're seeing right now. Can speak for all the special ed attorneys. There's a lot of activity right now coming from the more disabled part of the special ed population, so your low incidence disabilities, and the older kids. So we have kids that are, maybe turned are going to turn 22 sometime over the summer, or turning 22 now, and their parents are very acutely recognizing that they have missed 3 months. They will miss if we're not going to be open during the summer. And remember, these transition programs tend to operate year round. We're going to miss 6 months, 7 months of job training, of being out in the community, of training on essential life skills, self-care skills, and recognizing that that is going to cause a gap in their students' education. So they're demanding compensatory education right now. So I think, starting to engage with those people and make sure that you're doing what you can do to give them support at home, but also the people that you haven't heard from, you don't want this coming back at you later, just to keep reaching out to them and as a best practice to make sure that it doesn't sneak up at a later time and surprise you.
Yeah, and I think on the general ed front, just the districts that have used an incomplete for folks grading wise who have not engaged with remote learning, over this period in the spring need to figure out sort of what to do with those incompletes at some point. And so certainly summer engagement may be a good option. The ISB recommendation in terms of their remote learning talks about, opportunities to re-engage and to make up that incomplete both over the summer or potentially when we're back in session. So it doesn't have to happen over the summer necessarily, although that can be a good option for folks. But making sure that you have a plan in place to deal with, to deal with those incompletes and give students an opportunity. And obviously the hope is that they will reconnect with the school even over the summer.
So we've obviously talked last time about celebrations for seniors and for graduating students, but I know there's been a lot going on in that realm. So I wanted to get an update. Nicki, can you give us a sense of where are things with senior celebrations?
Sure, and I know that this has just been sort of a roller coaster for everybody, our seniors in particular, and our school districts who are really, really trying their best to give something celebratory to seniors and to families. So last time we had talked, ISB and the Illinois Department of Public Health had come out with revised guidance, basically allowing for some in-person celebrations as long as they complied with the governor's orders. So social distancing and, individual students walking across the stage or doing some of the sort of really creative, speedway type events. But some of our districts then got a little bit of a reversal because the DuPage public health officials, along with the DuPage ROE, came out and issued guidance basically saying that given the level of infection in DuPage and the specific circumstances of DuPage, they were recommending against in-person. So there was a little bit of a whiplash on that. And I know that the superintendents in DuPage are really working their way through this. Our thought at this point is, if you are in DuPage and your public health officials have recommended against, then you should likely follow that recommendation. For safety, health reasons, and then we can certainly get all lawyerly and talk about the liability concerns there. But obviously, their expert opinion is that it's not safe. We know that this, again, has caused a lot of disappointment and a lot of families, calling for some sorts of celebrations. So, we know that a lot of districts are doing some really, really creative remote ideas, video montages, posting information on their websites. I know Shelli has seen some. I know the New York Times was coming out with a bunch. So, we do encourage folks to think creatively, and about what they can do over the summer, but also thinking sort of more long-term. Dana and Shelli, one of you was talking about an event where it was going to take place over a winter break. Is that right?
We have some clients that are planning winter break celebrations and sort of just thinking of it more in terms of how do we bring people back to campus? I know for seniors in high school, they're going away to college, but for most of them, they're not going away. They're still going to be living it with their parents after that freshman year in school. So, or, whatever they're doing. So just bringing them back together again, when you have graduation next year and having a special celebration for them then, or during a time when they're on break from their college experience. Those are all options that we've heard about.
Yeah, and I would say that the only, the piece to this is I think it's important because we all, see on the news all these wonderful creative ideas, and some of them have some in-person component to them. And being able to communicate out to families, for instance, for those who are in DuPage County, why you may have one district who's not in DuPage who's able to do something that your district is unable to do. And remembering that those families don't have that information that the administrators have, and being able to really explain to them that you're doing what your county has determined is in the best interest of kids, even if it doesn't feel, great to them at that time. So really communicating, I think, is the key here.
So summer school is clearly on the horizon for our summer to-do list. So how should districts be handling summer school? Do we recommend that they continue to provide a full course load during that time remotely?
So, Shelli, I know you have some thoughts on this too. I think that obviously we need to provide ESY still. Just a quick reminder on that. There's certain things that we need to provide. We have some clients that are doing intensive sort of makeup and let's help the kids that really fell behind and try to work with them more intensely, either through small group Zooms or through very quick sessions where you meet sort of every day for a defined amount of time. But I think the overall concern with summer school is having people enroll and pay for courses that are credit courses that especially older students might need, and making sure those courses are as robust as they need to be. And I think that's something, Shelli, you could talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, in talking to some administrators recently and kind of really learning more about, summer school itself is already such a truncated way to have a curriculum, and delivering that in a remote platform when we have not done so, in the past, I think some districts are better equipped to do that than others. And I think for every district individually to identify, is this something that we can do? It's going to look very different than, e-learning, and that's delivering kind of the brick and mortar instruction curriculum in an electronic platform versus kind of an actual virtual platform to teach a full curriculum. So being really mindful of that. I will say for those districts though that decide not to do summer school, if you have teachers who kind of were already anticipating that, especially for those who might be in their kind of retirement track, making sure that you're working with the teachers and the union as to what else that teacher can be doing to still earn that compensation as it relates to their retirement. And one easy way is, I think we have a lot of kids who will need assistance with any incompletes that they've received. So being a resource for those kids. And I think there's also a lot of other creative things that we can make sure is still, creditable work for those teachers so that they do not have any sort of hit related to their pensions.
So we know, even though summer's right here, that before we know it, it'll be the fall and we will be back in school. And in order to get there, we are going to have to deal with registration. So what are schools, what should they be thinking about when it comes to registration? Amy, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, Jackie. I mean, I think most, school districts registration processes are already underway. And we know that many of you have adapted to allow for most required residency and enrollment paperwork to be submitted electronically where possible in light of the stay-at-home orders. So, continue to offer those opportunities, and where you require a hard copy of any forms, consider whether you can offer a safe and secure drop-off system for such documents, or consider accepting electronic copies for now and then having them submit official hard copies, such as for birth certificates, when schools are safe to reopen and those are safe to be submitted in that way. I'd also keep in mind that with the impact that the pandemic has had and will continue to have on the economy, just as we saw in 2008, we'd expect that school districts may be facing an increase in residency, homelessness, and fee waiver questions and issues as we head into next school year. So this is a good time, and the summer is a good time to be sure that your frontline staff and administration who handle registration and residency issues are sufficiently trained to make those residency determinations, to identify students who might be eligible to be enrolled at your schools and receive services as homeless, and the importance of immediately enrolling such students and looping in your homeless liaisons into that process, as well as having familiarity with the grievance process should any disputes or concerns arise over whether a student qualifies as homeless or as a resident of your district. It'll also be important to make sure that your staff is familiar with and complying with requirements with regard to fee waivers and that request process, as it may be that your districts see a significant increase in those families who are eligible for fee waivers. So we want to make sure that you're providing the proper notifications for those requests.
That's great. Shelli, can you tell us about what are thoughts for stipend assignments for next year?
Yes, I can. This actually came up as one of the questions that we dealt with yesterday. I was fortunate to participate on the joint IASPA panel yesterday, and this issue came up there. And I think it's a great question for all of our school administrators to be thinking about. And the first summer to do, I would say, with respect to this, is check your collective bargaining agreement. I know I keep saying that, but so much of this is dictated by that, and making sure that you are aware of the due date by which you must give your employees the notice that they will or will not be in that stipended position for next year. What I've been recommending to clients is to make sure that if you are letting someone know that they are going to be in that position for next year, that you are clear that that is conditional upon your ability to hold the program, so that you're not having to pay them like we are now for stipended positions that we can't have because there is not in-person instruction, or because the district otherwise determines that for whatever reason that they can't offer that programming. So just to be really clear in writing to them that yes, you will have this position as this coach if we are able to hold this program. So making sure that we're being clear on that.
Yes, that is so key. I talked to someone yesterday that moved $339,000 into the payroll account to pay for spring sports and spring activities that are not happening. So that was a very painful transfer, very painful bank transfer for that business manager. So that's all very sage advice.
And then Shelli, if those individuals, if the program doesn't end up being offered, would those individuals be eligible for unemployment?
So this is another great question. And COVID has given me cause to learn a lot more about unemployment law than I ever thought I would. Because I'll tell you, being an employment lawyer is not the same thing as being an unemployment lawyer. So the Department of Employment Security obviously is that makes the determination ultimately if someone is able to collect a benefit for unemployment. The answer to your question is it depends. So one teacher, depending on how much money they make and the amount of the stipend that they may have had reduction, may get a benefit from IDES, while the other teacher might not. So it really is about the calculation that IDS makes to determine if you fall within your weekly benefit amount, or if you're over it by the amount of money you are already still making, such that you would not be eligible for a benefit. So really, my one cautionary tale is please make sure that to our business officers or our HR people that you are not giving advice related to people about whether or not they are going to be able to collect unemployment or how much it'll be. That is really up to the Department of Employment Security, and it's complicated, and just leave it to them.
Right, and there's so many different people that fill stipend positions. There are some districts that have teachers in those roles, but there are lots of districts that employ outside people, and that affects the calculation as well.
Speaking of unemployment, we've heard some discussion about a union-backed proposal for expanded unemployment insurance for all educational support personnel. Nicki, have you heard anything about this, and what impacts might it have for summer planning for schools?
Right. I mean, what we've heard some limited information about this, Jackie. Union groups, as we understand it, are pushing the governor's office and the General Assembly to allow all education support personnel to be eligible for unemployment insurance benefits, permanent unemployment insurance benefits, by eliminating the provision that disqualifies coverage between terms. So essentially what this is just sort of a fancy way of saying that they would remain eligible for benefits over the summer. At this point, these are just efforts. We don't have any final action by the governor or by the General Assembly. So we will certainly keep you posted. Obviously, this will, impact the bottom line for school districts in terms of their liability for unemployment insurance benefits if these benefits continue over the summer, where normally they would not.
So we've talked about a lot of issues on the summer checklist, but I just want to kind of throw out there if there's any other planning that should be done that we haven't talked about. Does anybody have thoughts on that?
So I think one thing that everyone needs to be doing, which is something that they've been doing all along, is planning for scenario A, scenario B, scenario C. We're still in the point, and given the 5-phase plan that we started off this call with, we're still at the point in time when we really don't know everything that's going to happen. And I think the more that you can use time now, especially as things calm down a little bit and kids are dismissed from regular school for the regular term, about what communications you're going to need if you're in remote learning, what training you're going to need for teachers. If you're not in 100% remote learning, what is that the schedule? So just bringing together the groups of people that you need to have in the school. And I think that definitely means the union. That means different employee groups. That means leaders in different areas, from facilities to people that manage, support staff workers that work with kids and families. You need to have voice from everybody and really start planning out those different options. And that's going to be the topic of our next session. Does anyone else want to add anything to that? Anything I left off?
No, I mean, I think that's right, Dana. I think that's really what we should be thinking about. And as we go through the next sessions of our symposium, I think we're really going to be focusing individually on a lot of those pieces. So the reopening of buildings, how to, what it looks like to create safe spaces, depending on which phase we're in, what education looks like, remote or otherwise, for gen ed students, and also the specific considerations that we have towards special education students. Obviously, we'll get those webinars in before the summer hits, because I think a lot, as you said, a lot of the time over the summer is going to be spent looking through those different components.
Yeah, in a sense, if you're looking for a written roadmap of your summer to-do list, just look back at our symposium descriptions and titles, and that will give you a really good sense along with what you've heard today. So we did want to talk some about non-COVID issues. So first of all, should we be negotiating appeals for unsatisfactory evaluations? Amy, do you have thoughts on that?
Yes, the short answer is yes. If you haven't already begun that process, we do know that the requirement now that districts develop a process for teachers to appeal an unsatisfactory performance rating, that requirement is still in effect. Those deadlines have not been lifted. And so, as the statute says, beginning with the first school year following the effective date of August 20, of the act, which was August 27, 2019. So long story short, beginning with the 2020-21 school year, each district has to, in good faith bargaining with its teachers union, develop and implement the appeals process for unsatisfactory performance evaluation ratings. So the process has to include at least an assessment of the original rating by a panel of qualified evaluators that are agreed to by the para joint committee. And then the para joint committee must also determine the criteria for successful appeals, but then the issuance of a rating that might replace the unsatisfactory rating if an appeal is successful must be determined through bargaining between the district and the teachers union. So there is a role for both bargaining that a district must undergo with its union, as well as a role for the para joint committee that they must play in the development of this process. Obviously, if your negotiating teams and those who serve on the para joint committee are the same, then this process, may be, pretty streamlined for you to be able to go through. But we are working with districts. We do have guidance to offer in terms of things for you to consider, both in making this process go as efficiently as possible to develop this process, but also for things that you should be thinking about to make sure that when you're developing the process, it's covering all the different things that could arise, so that when you are, next year at a position where you might be actually implementing an appeals process, that some of these issues are already addressed. And we the act does say that beginning with the next school year, you must develop and implement the process. So a very conservative reading of that would be that you have to have the process in place by July 1st. But given the way the statute's written, we think that there is some leeway that if you really think you're not going to meet that deadline, having it in place at least by the start of the school term, and certainly no later than when ratings would actually be given out is what you need to do. So, we're certainly here working. We can work with you on that. Nicki, have you heard of any districts that are already starting that process or have completed it?
Yeah, we definitely have a handful of districts we know of that have either started or completed the process. And I know this all seems really topsy-turvy right now, given that we haven't actually done an observation or evaluation in person of a teacher over the spring, and we have all of the conversations about default ratings and all of that. But as you said, we haven't seen any easing of this as of yet. So, we're still on track to have to put this into place. So we definitely are suggesting that folks use the time now. As you mentioned, there's a lot of moving parts to this. It seems sort of the paragraph in the school code is I think it's just a couple of lines. It talks about an appeal process, but if you start to unpack this, there's just a lot of elements, like you talked about, who's on the panel, how long do they serve, what are the criteria they're using, just what's the process really that you're going to go through, what are the timelines. And so, as you said, we have guidance documents, we have lots of draft documents that can help. We can talk you through these, but it's probably right to start thinking about jumping on this now with your unions. It's a great time to sort of get this in place, pending any word that this is going to be, this requirement's going to be pushed off.
Yeah, and I could actually add to that. I mean, I was hopeful that this is something that the joint statement would have come out with, or ISB would have come out on their own with emergency rules to say that we could push this off another year, considering how full your plates already are. But unfortunately, we have not seen that happen yet. What we have recently learned, however, is that ISB is considering putting out emergency rules, or perhaps is in the process of, or we'll see it at 5 o'clock on Friday night, that indicates that the default, if you have not completed your evaluation of a tenured teacher, if they've had an excellent before, is going to default to excellent again. Now, it's my understanding it's that unless there is some other sort of written agreement between the union and the administration. I know many of you have already worked this out. The hope was that it would be able to be handled locally, and you were all being really creative with your districts and what worked for you. So my hope is that you've already done that and that you can not have to kind of deal with this on top of it as well. But I would say that to the extent that you have not, and you have a teacher who is defaulting to excellent, just make sure that everyone's on the same page, that you have the right then to evaluate them again next year in the event that there was some issue that you wanted to address.
Great point. So speaking of illy timed publications from agencies, Amy, last week we received Title IX regulations after a year and a half of waiting. And so I'm guessing that there's going to be a lot of time spent during school summer to do on Title IX. Can you talk about what that to-do list might look like?
Yes, absolutely. So as most of you are likely aware, as Jackie said, the Department of Education did issue Title IX regulations, amended Title IX regulations, which go into effect August 14th, 2020. So, our firm actually hosted a webinar this past Monday where we provided an overview of the new changes. And these rules include a number of fundamental changes to how schools must respond to reports and complaints of sexual harassment, including changes to the definition of sexual harassment under Title IX and the standard of liability that schools will be held to for compliance, as well as a number of very specific required steps that schools must follow during the grievance process, including the investigation stages that will require schools' policies and procedures to be significantly revised. So during our webinar, we did discuss a variety of next steps the district should take between now and August to ensure that their policies and practices are in compliance with the new rules by then. So if you did not get a chance to listen to that, I'd encourage you to do so as a first step. But in a nutshell, I'd say that the key steps for this summer are to confirm who your key team is for Title IX compliance, update your policies and procedures to comply with the new requirements, have all your staff who are responsible for implementing the new policies appropriately trained, and then ensure that you have the necessary record keeping and documentation systems in place to effectively implement the new processes. So I'll just talk a little bit about each of those really, really quickly. So with regard to your key team, confirm first who your Title IX coordinator and any deputy Title IX coordinators are, and have them begin now to become familiar with the new changes, including listening to webinars like the one that we offered. Your Title IX coordinator and administrative team should then really sit down and create a plan for compliance and what that will look like between now and the start of the school year. And that should include, will have to include revising your applicable policies and procedures to comply with the new stringent requirements. And those very well, will likely, look very different than how you may be currently used to seeing your written policies and procedures. So for those of you who subscribe to ISB's press policy services, we do know that ISB is hoping to issue its revised model policy by June, if possible. In fact, Jackie and I have been asked to work with ISB along with a few other attorneys on the updates to those policies. So once that is issued, it will be important to immediately begin reviewing those updates and plan to have them go to your boards this summer for approval. You'll then need to confirm the key individuals who will be responsible for implementing the required grievance process and who will then serve in those roles for your district. So not only your Title IX coordinators, but also your investigators and key decision makers, including who will be deciding any appeals, if there are any, or anyone who may be facilitating an informal resolution procedure. You want to also then make a plan to then have those key individuals appropriately trained. So not only is proper training going to be critical given the significant changes with which your district must be familiar, but also the rules expressly require specific training components as part of these new rules. So there are specific training requirements for the key individuals that are implementing these process that you will need to comply with. And then, finally, because the new grievance process does include various new record keeping and notification requirements, we really think you should ensure that you have, proactively the necessary record keeping and documentation systems in place to effectively implement the new processes. So it is a lot. I just said at a high level, and it's a lot. Our team is here. We will be offering trainings and resources for you to assist you in meeting these different requirements and creating, this plan and strategy for compliance, so be on the lookout for that. But in the meantime, don't hesitate to reach out if you would like assistance with strategizing and preparing now for these changes and how they will look for your particular districts and schools.
Absolutely. Nicki, another area that isn't necessarily COVID related, although now it feels intertwined, is student data privacy. What, if anything, should be on the summer to-do list with respect to that?
Sure, and I'm going to talk about sort of a non-COVID related and actually circle back, since it's all COVID related, as you said, and they're intertwined. So we've talked about this a little bit, and I know, Jackie, you and I we're planning a webinar on this topic for districts, so stay tuned for that. But we do want to remind folks that there are amendments to SOPA, which is the Student Data Privacy Law applicable in Illinois regarding your relationships with online education technology vendors. And SOPA has been in place for a couple of years, but the amendments that are going into effect July 2021 are pretty heavy duty. We're going to do a sort of a much more comprehensive webinar on this topic, but what SOPA requires, the new amendments require at a high level, are data sharing agreements with every one of your education tech vendors with whom you share student data. And all of those have to be posted in some way on your website. So there's a sort of the massive undertaking, I think, for this is really going to be for districts to sit down and figure out all of the contracts, from everything from your cafeteria contracts to your cafeteria, to your contracts with, Google Apps for Education, to your, one-off apps that you use at the classroom level. All of those are going to have to be looked at, ensure that there's a robust data sharing agreement in place, and that, and you're posting those on the website. So again, there's a lot of intricacy to this new amendment. It doesn't go into effect until next summer, which is great news. But now is the time, really, over the summer, to start really auditing what you're doing with student data and getting prepared for that amendment to go into effect. So I think on the non-COVID front, I would start taking a look at SOPA. Jackie and I have spent many, many hours sort of deeply immersed in the law. So we're happy to help. And again, we'll do an intro webinar for you guys, and then we're happy to sort of sit down with your districts to think about how to do this given your specific needs. On the COVID-related front, I just want to remind folks, there's a lot of moving parts when you're talking about education technology. We talked a lot about really exciting and innovative graduation ceremonies. Thinking about making sure that if you're sending out, we talked about this a bit last week, if you're sending out videos, making sure that if any students have opted out of videos, that you are adhering to those, maybe sending out sort of an updated email to parents saying, hey, a reminder, you opted out. That means you're not going to be in the graduation video. If you want to change your opt-outs, please let us know. And also thinking about, the fact that, everybody's communicating electronically right now. So a lot of your partners, your vendors are also, using information, sending out videos, posting things on YouTube, posting things on Facebook. You really have to make sure that they are not using images of your students improperly, that if those images have taken place in your school buildings, certainly you don't want vendors posting pictures of your children that haven't been, where the parents haven't consented. So thinking through all of those things, making sure that even though we're communicating electronically, we're doing it respectfully of parents' rights, student rights, and safely. Also, one final plug, which isn't really a data privacy plug, but more of a copyright plug for all those, again, incredibly creative graduation videos. Please be careful with the music that you're using. There is some fair use, but and a lot of artists have been amazing and are allowing folks to use their songs. We have lots of information on that, but making sure that if you're going to play an inspirational tune behind your pictures, that you are complying with copyright as well. So again, lots of moving parts, all very doable. Just making sure that we're following all of those rules.
Yeah, it's interesting. I would say the many copyright questions I've received so far since remote learning's gone into place, the vast majority of them, the answer has been, this is not fair use. So I think we often think it's a lot more broad than it really is. So it really is important to check that, because you'd hate to lose your only graduation memory for students because you can't have any sound on it, for instance.
Yeah, I was told one time when I expressed this to a superintendent that he did tell me that I was being no fun, and I assured him that you guys do not hire us to be fun, but that we are always the buzzkills as attorneys. But we try not to be, and we really try to think of creative ways for you guys to do this. And like I said, there's lots of artists out there. There's lots of ways to purchase this music pretty cheaply. So we're happy to walk you through it. We will try to do it in an upbeat fashion so that we are not accused of being no fun, but we'll really try to do it right. So as you said, Jackie, we are pulling videos back from parents when they're trying to look at them. So
Trust me, Jackie's a lot more fun than a, $20 million lawsuit from Time Warner or whoever owns the rights to whatever you're using.
absolutely.
Way more fun than that.
So we did get a couple of questions I'd like to get to from the Q&A. So the first of them was, I know proficient is the fallback designation if a teacher evaluation isn't completed. We have one teacher for whom we will just not be able to complete the evaluation. Is there any documentation required?
Well, I think I'll take that one. I mean, there's not necessarily documentation required with respect to the default is just going to be to proficient. I think that some districts are making note of it, that is why the teacher defaulted to proficient, and others are just allowing it to default to proficient for purposes of the sequence of honorable dismissal list.
All right, and then we received the question, with no children in our district buildings this summer, can we relax requirements for contractors and summer construction workers having fingerprinting and background checks?
Yeah, I mean, that's an interesting question. Technically the vendor provision, and I'd love to get other folks' thoughts on this, the vendor provision really speaks to sort of daily interaction with students. So the purpose of background checking your contractors is if they come in if they typically are coming into contact with students, and obviously we don't have students on campus now. I would, I guess I would still think about, I'd love to hear others' thoughts on this. I'm sort of still inclined to suggest that if folks are on school district property, you know, that you background check them. I mean, the last thing you want, even given all of the closures and the fact that students aren't around, the last thing I think you want is for it to come, you know, for it to come out that someone that you're employing has, particularly one of the prohibited offenses, and is walking around your school district campus. I just think that that could raise some concerns, even if technically the requirement would not apply if students aren't in the buildings.
Right, and there's other requirements that apply to school property and sex offenders, most specifically.
Absolutely.
Outside the school code that are not, you know, that are still in place, and you have to keep those in mind. And I think, you know, even if the chances of something bad happening are remote, it's always also the appearance of things. And if something gets out, you know, that you have Attila the Hun, you know, doing your tuck pointing, that's not going to be good.
Did he tuck point? I didn't.
It's a little known point of history.
Excellent.
Getting a little punchy here.
All right, Shelli, one more question. What should be, I'm sorry, how do you handle vacation for 12-month employees?
Oh, so in terms of, you know, circling back to the summer to-do list as it relates to kind of certainly COVID has impacted this, is that, you know, make sure you're looking at your contracts that you have with your administrators or your exempt support staff in terms of what their vacation allotment is. Many of you who have one-year contracts with administrators, there's a use it or lose it policy with respect to vacation. And you might really want to think, or a payout provision, either way, you might want to think about whether or not you enter into some agreement to extend that and allow it to roll over, presuming they're going to be employed for the next year. If you don't think right now is the best time for them to be taking vacation. Alternatively, for those who do allow for rollover, maybe you have a multi-year contract, perhaps talking to your administrators about taking it, you know, near the end of the school year, knowing that at the beginning of next school year, it is likely going to be kind of all hands on deck, getting ready for us to get back to school in whatever way that it is. So really just making sure that you're being mindful of what your contracts say and working with your, you know, your board and your administrators on that.
Yeah, we've just gotten a lot of questions about this. I think superintendents in particular are really trying to be sympathetic to the fact that vacations have really not happened for folks over this period, just given the crazy times that we're in. And so, you know, there are a bunch of administrators who are likely to lose their vacation. As you said, Shelli, look at your documents, your paperwork, your agreements, and all of those. But I do know that a lot of superintendents are looking to extend those time periods for administrators, just to give them a little bit of breathing room on those vacations. And certainly, you know, you can do that. It's just a matter of making sure that you're doing it in the right way with your contracts.
All right, I think that's all the time we have for today. I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us once again. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
And to all of our participants and listeners, thank you so much for joining us again, and we hope to see you next week. If you need any more information in the meantime, please feel free to reach out to one of us or check out our website at franzic.com. And until then, we hope that you take care. See you soon.